There are two versions of the story of what happened in that office hallway. In one, I was a coward who stood by and watched a young woman be tormented. In the other, I was the one being broken. The terrifying part is that for the longest time I only knew the first version, because my own mind had built a prison of guilt to protect me from a truth far, far worse. My name is Aisha, and I used to think I was a good person. I held doors for strangers, I donated to charity. I believed in the fundamental decency of people. But the day my colleagues cornered a young black intern, the day I watched her stumble and did absolutely nothing, I learned that good person isn't a state of being. It's a choice you have to make over and over, especially when you are being tested in ways you can't possibly imagine. I stood by and watched my colleagues torment an innocent girl who had just joined our office. But the real monsters in that building weren't just them. When a human rights inspector showed up, she didn't just uncover their disgusting, decades-old secrets. She uncovered mine. And that shattered everything I thought I knew about myself. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. It helps a lot. It all began with a quiet hum of ambition when Lila joined our team. Our office, a mid-level Seattle tech firm called Innovate Solutions, was pathologically obsessed with its progressive image. The headquarters was a monument to modern virtues. Gleaming glass walls for transparency, ethically sourced fair trade coffee brewing in the kitchen, and minimalist posters of smiling, diverse groups under sterile slogans like Unity in Diversity and Innovate Together. It felt like the future, which is precisely why I accepted the job in human resources. At 28, as an HR coordinator, I saw myself as a guardian of that culture. My job was to help build and protect an inclusive, safe environment. It felt deeply, personally important. That feeling was rooted in my own complex history. I am a black woman. More specifically, I was adopted at the tender age of 5 by a truly wonderful, impossibly kind white family. They raised me in a leafy, quiet suburb where the prevailing philosophy was to not see color, a mantra repeated with the best of intentions, believed to be the highest form of virtue. But this well-meaning blindness left me stranded in a strange and silent cultural limbo. I never felt black enough to fit into certain communities, yet the color of my skin was an undeniable declaration that I wasn't white. So, my entire life became an exercise in adaptation. I learned to be agreeable, to smooth over rough edges, to never ever make waves. I just wanted to blend in. Lila was the complete opposite. She was only 22, a new intern from a prestigious university, and she wore her identity with a breathtaking, unburdened ease I had only ever dreamed of. She was also black, adopted from an orphanage in Ethiopia, and she spoke about her experiences with an openness that was both beautiful and, to me, terrifying. She was brilliant, her mind a spark of creativity, and she was so touchingly eager to please. The moment I met her, I saw a younger, more hopeful version of myself, and a fierce, protective instinct flared inside me. I wanted to shield her from the world that had taught me to be so cautious. The problems didn't start with a bang, but with a slow, insidious poison seeping into the office atmosphere. The microaggressions were so subtle, so expertly veiled, that you would miss them entirely if you weren't the one being targeted. It began with Karen, a senior marketing manager with a brittle smile and eyes that seemed to constantly be assessing threats. From the moment Lila arrived, Karen viewed her presence as an affront. The campaign started quietly. Karen would consistently forget to include Lila on critical email chains, leaving her out of the loop on projects she was assigned to. In meetings, if Lila dared to share an idea, Karen would talk right over her, her voice a dismissive wave of sound. Then, just 5 minutes later, she would rephrase Lila's exact concept as her own, presenting it to nods of approval. I remember one Tuesday morning meeting with painful clarity. Lila, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady, presented a fantastic, meticulously researched idea for a new social media campaign. When she finished, a heavy silence filled the glass-walled conference room. Then Karen let out a short, patronizing laugh. "That's cute," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension so thick it was suffocating. "But let's pivot back to strategies with a proven ROI, shall we?" A few of the women who orbited Karen like anxious moons chuckled along obediently. I watched the bright light in Lila's eyes visibly dim, her shoulders slumping in defeat. My heart was hammering against my ribs. As HR, I should have intervened. I should have said, "Karen, let's explore Lila's idea further." Or, "That's a valuable contribution, Lila." But I was only 6 months into the job. And the quiet, insidious voice that had been my lifelong companion, the one that whispered survival tactics, began its familiar chant. "Don't make a scene, Aisha. Keep your head down. Don't draw attention to yourself. Just fit in." So I did nothing. I stared down at my blank notepad as if it held the secrets to the universe, my silence a betrayal that settled like a heavy stone in my gut. The whispers followed, becoming bolder. "She's just an affirmative action hire," one of Karen's friends muttered by the Fairtrade coffee machine, just loud enough for Lila to hear as she walked past. "The company needed to fill its diversity quota," I overheard another time in the hallway. A salesman with too much confidence cornered her by her desk and asked where she was really from. When she politely answered Seattle, he pressed on, smirking. "No, but like, originally. It was a death by 1,000 paper cuts, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that every single one was leaving a scar. I rationalized my inaction with a litany of excuses. It was just petty office politics. Lila was young but strong, she could handle it. I told myself that speaking up would only put a target on my own back, and I couldn't risk the career I had worked so desperately hard to build. I was a coward, and the knowledge was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. The smiling "Unity in Diversity" posters on the walls felt like they were mocking me personally. Unity, one of them read. I had never felt so completely fractured, torn between my professional duties, my conscience, and a deep, paralyzing fear that I couldn't even name. Section 2, The Escalation. The glacial creep of subtle cruelty soon gave way to a shocking and overt hostility. It was as if a silent agreement had been broken, and the bullies no longer felt the need to hide. The aggression became physical, impossible to ignore. The first major incident was the coffee spill. It was a hectic Monday morning, the office buzzing with post-weekend urgency. Lila was carefully navigating the main thoroughfare, her arms full with a precarious stack of client files and a fresh, steaming cup of coffee. Around the corner, Karen was approaching at a brisk pace, her eyes glued to her phone, completely oblivious. They were on a collision course. Anyone could see it coming. I saw the moment, a split second of decision, where Karen could have easily sidestepped. But she didn't. She held her path, her shoulders squared, and plowed forward, slamming directly into Lila. Hot, dark coffee erupted, splashing all over Lila's crisp white blouse and soaking the important file she was carrying. "Oh my God, watch where you're going," Karen snapped, not even glancing at Lila, instead brushing at her own sleeve as if Lila had contaminated her with her clumsiness. Lila just stood there, frozen in shock, her body trembling. "I am so sorry," she stammered, the apology a reflex even though it was so clearly, unequivocally not her fault. I was standing less than 10 feet away. My entire body went rigid. Every fiber of my being was screaming, "Go to her. Help her. Say something." I saw Karen's friends snickering behind their monitors, their faces alight with malicious glee. They knew it was deliberate. I knew it too. But that insidious voice in my head was louder than my conscience. "Don't get involved. It's not your fight. They'll come for you next." The fear was a cold, physical hand gripping my throat. I ducked my head and busied myself at the printer, pretending to be fascinated by a paper jam that didn't exist. I didn't look up until Lila had fled to the restroom. Her shoulders slumped in humiliation. The shame was so potent it made me physically nauseous. The second incident was the elbow. This was the one that finally broke something deep inside me. We were all filing out of a mandatory company-wide meeting, and the hallway was a bottleneck of bodies. Lila was walking a few feet ahead of me, trying to get back to her desk. I saw Karen and her closest friend, Sarah, move in on either side of her, a practiced predatory flanking maneuver. As they passed a narrow point near a concrete pillar, Karen jabbed her elbow out. A sharp, vicious, calculated movement, right into Lila's ribs. It wasn't an accident. It was a shove, designed to inflict pain and humiliation. Lila let out a sharp gasp and stumbled hard, crashing into the wall. Her notebook and a cascade of papers scattered across the floor. "So clumsy," Sarah chirped with a fake saccharine-sweet smile, not even breaking her stride. Karen just smirked, a fleeting, ugly flash of triumph in her eyes, and kept walking, the queen bee and her court moving on without a backward glance. This time there was no plausible deniability. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen it. I was right there. I watched in horror as people just parted and walked around Lila as she slid down the wall to the floor, a small island of misery in a rushing river of corporate indifference. For a few agonizing seconds, my feet felt like they were encased in lead, glued to the floor. Finally something gave way. I moved, my steps stiff and robotic. I knelt beside her and began helping her pick up her scattered papers, my own hands shaking uncontrollably. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice a strangled whisper. She wouldn't look at me. She just nodded, her movements small and jerky, her face a mask of shame. "I'm fine," she mumbled, but a single hot tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away furiously, as if angry at herself for showing a moment of weakness. Then she scrambled to her feet and practically ran back to her desk, leaving me kneeling on the cold floor with the weight of my complicity. That night sleep was impossible. The guilt was a living entity, coiling in my gut. My silence was no longer passive. It was an active form of participation. I was an HR coordinator, a supposed guardian of the workplace. Instead, I was just another bystander, another person who looked away. The next morning, I woke up with a cold, hard resolve. I was done. I was going to my boss, the head of HR, and I was going to report everything, consequences be damned. I was terrified, but the thought of enduring another day of doing nothing was infinitely worse. I never got the chance. Around 10 a.m., a woman I had never seen before walked into our office. She was in her late 40s, dressed in a severe but practical suit, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. She carried an aura of calm, unshakable authority that immediately silenced the low hum of the office. "My name is Elena Ramirez," she announced to the receptionist, her voice clear and firm, carrying across the open-plan space. "I'm an investigator with the Federal Office of Civil and Workplace Rights. I'm here in response to an anonymous complaint regarding discrimination and harassment. I need to speak with the head of HR." Immediately, a profound hush fell over the entire office. Everyone froze. Keyboards stopped clicking. I saw Karen's head snap up from her desk, her face suddenly a mask of chalky white. A tidal wave of cold dread, and strangely, an overwhelming sense of relief, washed over me. The secret was out. An investigation was starting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that everything was about to change. I just had no idea that the person it would change the most was me. Section 3. The investigation and the twist. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. The arrival of Inspector Ramirez sent ripples of contained panic through the office. She was methodical, dispassionate, and utterly unflappable. She commandeered an empty glass conference room, which was immediately and grimly nicknamed the interrogation room. For 2 solid days she called employees in one by one. The tension in the office was so thick you could taste it, a metallic tang of fear in the air. My interview was scheduled for the afternoon of the second day. This was it. This was my moment of redemption, my chance to finally do the right thing. I walked into the conference room on legs that felt like they were made of jelly. "Aisha Thompson, thank you for coming in," Inspector Ramirez said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Her eyes were analytical, giving nothing away. "My role here is to conduct a fact-finding inquiry. I'm here to gather information from all perspectives to understand what's been happening at this company. I want to help," I began, my voice trembling despite my resolve. "I've seen things. A new intern, Lila. She's been targeted. bullied. And then I poured it all out. The dam of my guilt and shame finally broke, and the story came flooding out in a torrent. The whispers, the condescending remarks, the deliberate coffee spill, the vicious elbow in the hallway. I gave her every single detail I had locked away, my voice cracking with the shame of my own inaction. Inspector Ramirez listened with unwavering patience, her pen scratching across her notepad, documenting everything. "You witnessed all of these events?" she asked when I finally fell silent, exhausted. "Yes. And I'm so deeply ashamed I didn't do anything to stop it." "Why didn't you?" she asked. It was a simple, direct question that landed with the force of a physical blow. "I was afraid," I admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Afraid of losing my job. Afraid they would turn on me next." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I've interviewed Karen Miller and her colleagues," she said calmly. "They deny everything. They claim the incidents you described were unfortunate accidents, and that Lila is simply overly sensitive and not a good fit for a fast-paced corporate culture." "That's a lie," I blurted out, my indignation overriding my fear. "I also interviewed Lila," Inspector Ramirez continued, and my stomach clenched into a tight, painful knot. "She denied being bullied. In fact, she said that everyone here has been very welcoming and professional." I just stared at her, my mind unable to process the words. "What? Why would she say that? That's not possible. She's terrified." "Perhaps," the inspector said, and her eyes seemed to narrow, her focus sharpening on me. "Or perhaps the story is more complicated than you think." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "Aisha, tell me about your own background. You were adopted, correct?" The question was so out of left field it threw me completely off balance. "Yes, when I was 5. By a white family. And your work here in HR," she went on, her gaze unwavering. "You've been using your clearance to look into some old sealed employee files from about 20 years ago. Why?" My blood ran cold. It was true. Driven by a lifelong ache to understand my own identity, I had used my HR access to poke around in the deep digital archives. It was a minor breach of protocol, born of curiosity. I was just researching company history," I stammered, my heart starting to pound again. Inspector Ramirez's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than professional detachment. It was pity. "Aisha," she said, her voice softening slightly. "The anonymous tip that brought me here. It didn't mention Lila." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Me? That's impossible. I'm not the one being bullied." "Aren't you?" she asked gently. She turned her laptop around to face me. On the screen was security footage from the hallway, from the day of the elbowing. But the angle was higher up, from a camera I never knew existed, capturing the entire scene with stark, emotionless clarity. I saw the crowded hallway. I saw Karen and Sarah. But Lila wasn't there. It was me. I was the one they flanked. I watched in abject horror, as Karen's elbow jabbed viciously into my side. I saw myself stumble hard into the wall, my own papers scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. I watched as Aisha slid down the wall in a heap of misery. And then I saw a young woman with bright, kind eyes, Lila, rush over, her face a mask of concern, kneeling to help me. My mind was a vortex of confusion. Didn't make any sense. I remembered watching it happen to her. The memory was so vivid, so real. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This is the truth," Inspector Ramirez said gently. "I've reviewed weeks of security footage. The coffee accident that happened to you. The whispers about being a diversity hire. They were always about you. Every single incident of harassment that you described happening to Lila happened to you." It felt as if the floor had dissolved beneath my chair. Distorted, phantom sensations began to surface. The ghost of a hot sting of coffee on my skin. A dull, throbbing ache in my ribs. The crushing weight of humiliation. My mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, had created a shield. It had cast me as the guilty bystander because the reality of being the powerless victim was too painful to bear. It gave me the illusion of choice, to be a silent coward, rather than forcing me to confront the absolute powerlessness of being the one on the ground. Lila wasn't the victim. She was the only person in the entire office who was consistently kind to me. She was the one who helped me up. But why? I choked out, hot tears blurring the horrifying image on the screen. Why me? This is where the inspector's expression hardened, the pity evaporating and replaced by a cold, sharp anger. That, she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register, is the part of this that truly shocked me. She slid a thick, old-fashioned file folder across the table. This is why they started harassing you the moment you began digging into the company's old records. They were terrified you would find this. My hands trembled so badly I could barely open the folder. The first page was an adoption record. My adoption record. But it wasn't from a state agency. It was a private document, stamped with the letterhead of a long-disbarred law firm. And then I saw the names. Signatures from two of the company's founding partners, men now in their 70s. And the name of the woman who gave me up, a young, terrified employee at this very company, 23 years ago. Your adoption wasn't just private, Aisha, the inspector said, her voice low and steady. It was illegal. You weren't adopted. You were trafficked. Your birth mother was a teenager, an intern who was coerced by powerful men at this company to cover up a massive scandal. The file documenting it all was supposed to have been destroyed, but a copy was buried. Karen and a few other senior staff members who have been here for decades have known about it for years. When you, a black woman who was the living, breathing proof of that crime, started working in HR with access to those very files, they panicked. They tried to intimidate you, to bully you into quitting, before you could uncover the truth about your own existence. I stared at the documents, at the cold, bureaucratic story of my own life laid bare as a corporate conspiracy. The bullying wasn't random cruelty. It was a calculated, desperate campaign to protect a monstrous secret. My colleagues weren't just tormenting me. They were trying to erase me all over again. The girl who was elbowed in the hallway wasn't some clumsy intern. It was me. And I wasn't just a victim of workplace bullying. I was a survivor of something so much darker. It had stolen my life before I even had a chance to live it. Section 4, The Fallout. For several long minutes in that sterile conference room, I couldn't breathe. The black and white ink on those yellowed pages detailed the cold, transactional theft of my entire life. When the initial shock finally began to recede, it was replaced by something I had never felt before. A pure, cold fury. It was a rage so deep and so absolute that it burned away the fear that had kept me paralyzed and silent for months. With Inspector Ramirez's guidance and the full force of a federal investigation behind me, things moved with blinding speed. What began as a workplace harassment probe exploded into a full-blown criminal inquiry involving trafficking, coercion, and conspiracy. The fallout at Innovate Solutions was apocalyptic. Karen, Sarah, and 3 other senior employees were immediately put on indefinite leave, then summarily fired. The 2 founding partners whose names were on my illegal adoption file, both long retired but still holding seats on the board, were named in the investigation. The company that was so proud of its progressive posters and fair trade coffee was now at the epicenter of a massive human rights scandal that made national news. The day the story broke internally, the office was as silent as a tomb. I walked through the halls, and for the very first time I didn't lower my gaze. I looked directly at the people who had ignored me, who had snickered at me, who had watched me suffer. They couldn't meet my eyes. Their silence, once a weapon against me, was now a public admission of their own complicity. The most important conversation I had was not with a lawyer or an investigator, but with Lila. I asked her to meet me for coffee, far away from the toxic ghost of our office. Lila, I began, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I am so sorry. She just looked at me with those same kind, steady eyes. For what? Aisha, you were the one they were attacking. I saw it. But in my head, I confessed, the words tasting like poison, I made you the victim. I projected my own pain and humiliation onto you because I couldn't face it myself. You were showing me kindness, and my traumatized brain twisted it into a narrative where I was the guilty one. I was such a coward. Lila reached across the table and took my hand, her grip firm and warm. Aisha, you were not a coward. You were surviving. Trauma does strange, unthinkable things to protect us. You didn't see me as a victim. You saw me as an ally. And you were right. I saw what they were doing to you. I was the one who was too scared to know what to do to help. Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. We talked for hours. I told her everything about the files, about my life. In that small, quiet coffee shop, I finally found the solidarity and the sense of true belonging that I had been desperately searching for my entire life. The legal battle was long and draining, but with the federal government's evidence, the outcome was decisive. The company was forced into a massive settlement and a complete, court-ordered overhaul of its leadership and policies. But most importantly, the investigation unlocked the door to my past. It led me to my birth mother. She was still alive, a woman haunted by the impossible choice she was forced to make as a scared teenager. Our reunion is a fragile, sacred story for another day, but it was the beginning of a new, profound kind of healing I never knew was possible. I am not the same quiet, agreeable person who first walked into that glass-walled office. The woman who emerged from that fire learned that her voice has power. I learned that evil isn't always a dramatic, cackling villain. Sometimes it's the casual cruelty in a coworker's smirk, the calculated indifference of a bystander, and the complicit silence of people who should and do know better. To find my truth, I had to confront the most painful parts of myself. The shame, the deep-seated identity issues born from my adoption, and the all-consuming fear. But in doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Inspector Ramirez didn't just uncover a corporate crime. She handed me back my own story, my own history. Lila didn't just offer to help me pick up my papers. She showed me what true, courageous allyship looks like. I ended up leaving that company, of course. There were too many ghosts in those glass hallways. I went back to school, and now I work for a nonprofit that advocates for the rights of adoptees and victims of illegal and coercive adoption practices. I use my voice to help other people find their own truths, to piece together the stories that were stolen from them. My story is proof that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are not the ones others keep from us, but the ones we keep from ourselves. My journey to justice began the moment that Inspector walked through the door, but my journey to healing truly began the moment I could finally look in the mirror and accept the person I saw. Not as a bystander, not as a victim, but as a survivor who was finally ready to fight. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.